Phandalin and Faerûn. When I was in high school, my friend's dad used to make this dish he called everything casserole. He was a real
"Hi, it's Fitz with Slap Chop"
kind of guy. He was a single dad, and he had to do way more adulting than any one person should. Basically, at the end of the week, he would take all of the leftovers from the refrigerator, broccoli and frozen peas and fried chicken and shrimp pasta, and he'd throw it all together in a casserole dish.
Tacos, fettuccine, linguine, martini, bikini.
He'd add a can of Campbell's mushroom soup and bake it in the oven. Sometimes everything casserole is how the family gets fed, and that's okay. But sometimes we want to put a little more thought into our creations. Whether that's painting a picture or making a resume, playing D&D or making YouTube videos. And what we take out is just as important as what we put in. Faerûn is everything casserole. It has mind flayers and beholders, devils and demons. It's got vampires and werewolves. It's got dungeons and dragons and fairy dragons and gem dragons and shadow dragons and dragon turtles. And it's just too much for any one adventure setting. Because every new thing you put in makes everything else just a little bit less exciting. So let's talk about the setting of The Lost Mine of Phandelver. And while we do, I want you to be very conscientious of what you're putting in and what you're taking out. Brandon Sanderson divides his world building into two categories: the physical and the cultural.
Now, physical setting, for me, is all the stuff that would exist whether or not there were sentient beings on the planet doing things, right? If you remove them all from the planet, this stuff would all exist.
For example, weather patterns, tectonic activity, the map, flora and fauna, the magic, the visuals, the cosmology, terrain and climate, races.
Let's go over to cultural setting. Let's start talking about all the different things you can world build with cultural setting. Start throwing them at me.
Religion, government, economics, gender roles, borders, fashion, food lore, history, rites of passage, hierarchy, languages, taboos / mores, military, greeting, myth.
Oh boy. We could go on for a long time, couldn't we? One lesson of this is there's a ton of things that human beings do that are really interesting and really fascinating, and you could probably spend the rest of your life building a world where you took everything that we wrote on the board, let's say we took an hour, wrote everything we think of on the board, and then you could spend 80 years building a world where you consider every one of these things.
And in this video, we'll be looking at every single one of those. Just kidding. Instead, we're going to be looking at just the most essential information about the Forgotten Realms and just the most essential information about Phandalin. After that, I'll give you a little bit of advice on customizing the setting, making it your own. This video is not a comprehensive overview of the Forgotten Realms. That would require an entire YouTube channel of its own. In fact, there is one. If you're interested in that, check out Jordan, the PH is silent, here on YouTube. Link in the description below. Because his channel is...
Oh,
Mm-hmm. You know that's fire.
yeah, fucking fire.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and as for spoilers, this video does contain spoilers for The Lost Mine of Phandelver, but it does not contain spoilers for its expansion.
The Shattered Obelisk.
It's worthless. Forget about it.
Our story takes place in a small town on the Sword Coast, in the savage north of the continent of Faerûn, in the multiplanar universe of the Forgotten Realms. And I hope that gives you the impression that the Forgotten Realms is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts compared to the Forgotten Realms. Zoomed this far out, you may be wondering what can even be meaningfully said about a setting this vast. Fortunately, the Dungeon Master's Guide to the Galaxy has us covered. And plus, it has "Don't Panic" written on the cover in big friendly letters. In the much maligned first chapter of the DMG, the designers explained the 5 basic assumptions they had in mind when they wrote the rules for the game. These assumptions are: first, gods oversee the world. They are real, they are active, and for a character to deny that is delusion. The gods are also plentiful, and they're not geographically constrained. There is no national religion. There is no one true church, and that's not even a concept that would make sense to the gods in this world. Second, much of the world is untamed. There is more unknown than known. Third, the world is ancient. This is why it's called the Forgotten Realms. Advanced civilizations, vast empires, and god kings beyond number have all been lost to the sands of time.
And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
Fourth, conflict shapes world history. In our real world, history is influenced most by geographical realities, resources, technology, infrastructure, natural disasters, plagues, and famines. Great man theory is so out right now. It's imperative that you understand this is not the case in D&D. In this world, history is shaped by the actions of great heroes, scheming villains, and the factions they control. History is determined by a sword fight on a mountaintop, by a friendship that cannot be broken, by a love story that unites a divided land. Fifth, the world is magical. Not everybody can personally do magic, but everybody can see the effect that it has. Kind of like how, in our real world, not everybody has necessarily eaten pizza, and most people don't know how to cook it, but we're all pretty much on the same page about the concept. You don't have to agree with these world-building assumptions. In fact, you're encouraged, on the very same page, to make your own world with different assumptions. But remember, these assumptions are not just baked into the Forgotten Realms, they're baked into the player's handbook. And so, any changes you make here are gonna have to be communicated clearly to the players. Also, it goes without saying that the people who wrote the rules for D&D have played a lot of D&D. They chose these ingredients because they've been proven to work from experience. So, if you're a new DM, maybe try this the old-fashioned way before you go tinkering with the recipe. Or, imagine you're having dinner at a nice steakhouse. Don't you want to try that filet mignon before reaching for the table salt or the ketchup or...
They can't stop you from ordering a steak and a glass of water. Before you knew it, we were dumping that water on those steaks. The waiters were coming to try and snatch him up. We had to eat as fast as we could. Oh, I miss those nights. I was a piece of shit, though.
At this point, We could do a deep dive into all of the lore and history and politics of the Forgotten Realms, but I think as long as you keep these 5 basic assumptions in mind, you don't really need to. Like, what is the doctrine of Timora? Don't worry about it. That's not how religion works. What was the effect of the spell plague on the order of battle of the army of Neverwinter? Don't worry about it. That's not how war works. What is the GDP of Tribor? Don't worry about it. That's not how any kind of storytelling works. You could run yourself ragged trying to memorize every little detail about Faerûn and the Forgotten Realms, but you shouldn't. This world contains far, far more than any adventure can or should include. To serve as a good adventure setting, superfluous details must be elided. You've got to leave stuff out. I'll have some more advice later on about running this adventure in a homebrew world of your own. But first, I'd like to zoom in a little bit and take a closer look at Phandalin itself.
You're gonna love my nuts. Watch this. You know what they charge at the ice cream stores? $1 for toppings at the ice cream stores.
Whereas Faerûn is big and complicated and filled beyond bursting with content, Phandalin is small and self-contained. It's got all the essentials needed for a great adventure. What are those essentials, you might ask? Well, most importantly, a town needs a reason for existing. This should be obvious to your players, up front and center. Why does Phandalin exist? Here's what the book says. Phandalin is a bustling frontier settlement, home to farmers, woodcutters, fur traders, and prospectors, drawn by stories of gold in the foothills of the Sword Mountains. This is not a quiet little fishing village, nor is it the seat of a great empire. This is a town full of wide-eyed dreamers looking to strike it rich. That is the central flavor of Phandalin, and you should always be able to taste it. But to break up the monotony, we need some eccentricities, some herbs and spices, if you will. For example, in the expansion to the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the Shattered Obelisk, we get this cute little NPC, Ramble, the gnome, in his cute little capybara mount. How do I put this? OR6A2 is an olfactory receptor encoded by the OR6A2 gene. But depending on your ancestry, about 80% of people don't have that gene, which means to them, cilantro tastes like...
I don't mean to offend, but this tastes like vomit.
Thank you.
No, actually, I did mean to offend a little. This is awful.
To me, that capybara is barf. But, like cilantro, I can just open up my Vietnamese sub and take it out. What other factors should we consider? Well, what do adventurers usually look for when they come to a new town? A tavern to rub shoulders with the locals? Maybe the town hall to meet with the leaders? A place to buy and sell some goods? They might be looking for some healing. And if you've got a rogue in the party, he might be keeping an eye out for the town guard. Those 5 items roughly correspond to what Dael Kingsmill, the immortal Dael Kingsmill, refers to as the 5 spheres of society: social, political, economic, religious, and military. Or, in other words...
You have to be ready to giggle because it is called the sperm principle.
I don't think there's anything I can say here better than what she says in her own video on the topic. Link in the description below. Check it out give her a like, because her channel is F-I-R-E fire! Give it a watch, and then consider what people or places fill those roles in Phandalin. It's not too hard to figure out. But I will give you the answer for the last one, military. There isn't one. Or, rather, that role has been usurped by the Red Brands, a gang of thugs who are only interested in lining their own pockets. They're not here to serve or protect anything. It is this absence that grounds the central conflict of our entire story. More on that later.
All right, this is making you cry, making me cry. All right, life's hard enough as it is. You don't want to cry anymore.
When it comes to customizing the setting, or replacing it entirely with your own homebrew world, I have 3 big pieces of advice. First, before you take something out, consider what function it's playing. Ask yourself, why do our heroes get jumped by Red Brands before investigating Tresendar Manor? Why are there all these traps before they can finally confront Iarno? Well, let's consult the DMG. Page 84. The Adventuring Day. Assuming typical adventuring conditions and average luck, most adventuring parties can handle about 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters in a day. If the adventure has more easy encounters, the adventurers can get through more. If it has more deadly encounters, they can handle fewer. These little encounters are the filler that prevents your party from devouring the final boss in one giant gulp. In other words, if you take that leftover lo mein and saffron rice out of the everything casserole, you'd better replace it with some chickpeas, or else the kids are going to wake up hungry in the night. Second, if you put something new in, consider what will be pushed aside as a result. Sheena Iyengar is a researcher who studies the psychology of human decision-making. She lost her sight at a young age, so much of her research centers around choices in a medical context. But keeping in line with the theme of this video,
1990s, and I was a PhD student at Stanford University, and I used to frequent this upscale grocery store called Draeger's. Now, at that time, this store was a real novelty. It offered you 250 different types of mustards, vinegars, mayonnaises, over 500 different types of fruits and vegetables. We decided to do a little experiment. Now, the experiment was done with jam. Their jam aisle is here. They have 348 different kinds of jam. And so we set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of the store where we either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we essentially looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and sample some jam, right? And second, were more people likely to buy a jar of jam? So it turned out more people stopped when there were 24 on display, about 60%, as opposed to when there were 6 on display, about 40%. Now, everybody sampled exactly 2 jams because they were too embarrassed to try more. But when it came down to buying behavior, we saw the opposite effect. So of the people who stopped when there were 24 on display, only 3% of them bought a jar of jam. Whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam.
Your players can't actually compare 15 different factions, let alone choose between them. If you want to add an entire chicken carcass to your stew...
Whoa. There's still plenty of meat on that bone. Now you take this home, throw it in a pot, add some broth, a potato. Baby, you got a stew going.
You'd better make room for it. Otherwise, the pot's gonna boil over, dummy. Third, if you decide to run this adventure in a homebrew setting, you have got to make sure you include the essentials. The essentials are a variety of options in a variety of categories, such as race, class, religion, or politics, that your players can identify with and engage with. In the language of improv, those are offers that you make to your players in the hopes that they yes and those offers. Here's a rule of thumb on how to do that. Step 1. Figure out which of these options you, as the DM, are most excited about. Present those to your players in an appealing way, in-game or out of game. If they bite, great. If not, proceed to Step 2. Be ready to give a little taste of anything. Pay attention to which things pique your players' interest. Add more of that, and let the other stuff fade into the background. We've talked a lot about essentials so far in this video, but I've held off talking until now about the most essential of the essentials. The thing that makes this a good setting, and indeed a good story, is that it includes people who want things. For example, Sildar wants to find his missing colleague. Halia Thornton wants to take over the Red Brand's criminal operation. Sister Garail wants to find the Book of Bowgentle. Daran Eatermouth wants to learn what's going on at Old Owl Well. And Rydoth the Druid wants to liberate Thundertree from a certain green dragon. This is the essence of conflict. Man versus man! Man versus nature! Elf versus anthropocentrism! Somebody wants or needs something very, very badly, but there is someone or something standing in the way. Conflict. It is the meat and potatoes of D&D. Without conflict, a story isn't a story. It's just an anecdote. You may not like each of these NPCs or quests or factions, but if you take them out, your players are gonna be like...
There's been a mistake. You've accidentally given me the food that my food eats.
To recap, the Forgotten Realms is big and messy, and it contains far more than you can fit in a single adventure, or even be reasonably expected to know and understand as the DM. Instead, remember the 5 world-building assumptions from the DMG. Gods oversee the world. Much of the world is untamed. The world is ancient. Conflict shapes the world's history. And the world is magical. Phandalin is small and self-contained. It has all the essentials for a great adventure, like a strong raison d'etre, flavorful little details, and sperm.
Social, political, economic, religious, military. You got it.
And most importantly, it has people who want things. Sildar, Halia, Sister Garail, Daran Eatermouth, Rydoth the Druid. Psst! You may have noticed that those 5 NPCs are representatives of the 5 factions of D&D, which is the super secret topic of the next video. Don't tell anyone. You are free to tinker with the setting details to your heart's content. Indeed, that is the greatest thing about D&D. But be conscientious of the function of the stuff you're taking out and what you are replacing it with. That's it for this video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Check us out over on Patreon if you want to watch our full playthrough of the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. Remember that I believe in you, and the best thing you can do is fail and try again. I'll see you next time.